She obeys when it serves her. She gives you what you want, until she gets what she needs. And when she's done, she leaves, without ever having loved you. Carl Jung didn't romanticize female love. He saw through the performance. He understood something most men realize too late. Many women don't love. They attach. They calculate. They adapt. You thought she cared, but she was just mirroring your desire. You gave everything. She gave enough to keep you there. This isn't a story of heartbreak. It's a blueprint of how feminine instinct works, beneath the masks. And once you see it, you won't unsee it. In this video, we'll uncover the psychology behind the woman who never loved you, not because she's evil, but because she never had to. Carl Jung discovered something that shakes men to their core. Inside every woman lives a masculine energy he called the animus. When this inner man is wounded, she becomes incapable of genuine love. She doesn't even know it's broken. You've seen her. The woman who seems perfect on the surface but feels hollow underneath. She says the right words, makes the right moves, but something essential is missing. Jung understood why. Her animus, the part of her that should connect with your masculine energy, is shattered. This isn't about her hating men. It's deeper. Her inner masculine is corrupted, twisted by past trauma or neglect. Maybe her father was absent. Maybe he was cruel. Maybe he was weak. Whatever happened, it broke the template for how she relates to masculine energy. When her animus is wounded, she doesn't love men. She uses them. She sees you as a tool to fix what's broken inside her. Your strength becomes her borrowed confidence. Your love becomes her validation drug. Your resources become her security blanket. Jung observed that these women develop a peculiar relationship with masculinity. They're simultaneously attracted to it and repelled by it. They need it, but resent needing it. They crave masculine energy, but can't truly receive it because their inner masculine is at war with itself. She'll test your strength constantly, not because she wants you to be strong, but because she's trying to heal her broken animus through you. When you pass her tests, she doesn't feel love. She feels temporary relief. When you fail them, she doesn't feel disappointed. She feels confirmed in her belief that men are fundamentally flawed. This is why she can't love you the way you love her. Her animus creates a distorted lens through which she sees all masculinity. You're not a person to her. You're a projection screen for her inner conflicts. She's not relating to you. She's relating to her damaged masculine shadow. The tragedy is that she genuinely believes she's loving you. But what she calls love is actually dependency disguised as affection. She needs you to function, but she doesn't value you as an individual. You're interchangeable. Any man who fulfills the same functions would receive the same love. Jung saw through this performance because he understood that true love requires integration. A woman with a wounded animus cannot integrate masculine energy properly. She can only consume it, manipulate it, or rebel against it. She cannot dance with it in the way that creates genuine romantic connection. This is why she leaves when she's done extracting what she needs. Once her animus has temporarily stabilized through your energy, she no longer requires your presence. The love you thought you shared was actually just her wounded psyche feeding off your masculine essence. 2. The dark twin. She hides from everyone. Jung revealed that every woman carries a shadow, the dark twin of her public persona. This shadow contains everything she refuses to acknowledge about herself. When this shadow grows too large, it devours her capacity for authentic love. She shows you her light side, the caring, nurturing, gentle woman who seems to embody everything feminine and beautiful. But Jung knew better. He understood that this light persona often exists specifically to hide something much darker underneath. Her shadow contains her rage, her selfishness, her cruelty, her manipulation. All the qualities she's been taught are unacceptable for women to express. Instead of integrating these aspects healthily, she buries them so deep that they begin to control her from the unconscious. This is why she can hurt you with such precision while maintaining complete innocence in her own mind. Her shadow knows exactly where your weak spots are, but her persona never acknowledges delivering the blows. She's not lying when she acts confused about your pain. Her conscious mind genuinely doesn't recognize her shadow's actions. Jung observed that women with large, unintegrated shadows develop a peculiar form of unconscious cruelty. They destroy relationships while believing themselves to be victims. They manipulate while thinking they're being authentic. They take while believing they're giving. The shadow operates through what Jung called projection. Everything dark within her gets projected onto others. You become the selfish one. You become the manipulator. You become the one incapable of love. Meanwhile, her shadow feeds and grows stronger through these projections. She can't love you because love requires owning all parts of herself, including the ugly parts. But she's built her entire identity around being good, pure, innocent. To acknowledge her shadow would shatter this identity. So instead, she makes you carry the darkness for both of you. This is why relationships with these women feel crazy-making. You're constantly defending yourself against accusations that feel like they're coming from nowhere. But they're not coming from nowhere. They're coming from her disowned shadow, projected onto you with surgical precision. The shadow also explains her hot and cold behavior. When her persona is in control, she's loving and warm. When her shadow emerges, she's cold and cruel. But she never connects these two states because she's convinced they're separate people, and only one of them is really her. Jung understood that until a woman integrates her shadow, she cannot love authentically. She can only love the image she has of herself, and she needs you to reflect that image back to her. The moment you mirror anything that reminds her of her shadow, the love disappears. By the way, if you're curious to go even deeper and integrate your shadows and light, check out the SIM Method ebook. It's a concise guide that can help you unlock your inner power in just 5 minutes a day. The link is in the first pinned comment below. 3. The mother wound that poisons everything. Carl Jung discovered that some women carry a mother complex so deep it corrupts every relationship they enter. They're not loving you. They're trying to heal a wound that can never be healed through romantic love. The mother complex isn't just about having a difficult mother. It's about carrying an unresolved energetic pattern that shapes how she relates to everyone around her. Some women become eternal daughters, seeking a mother figure in every relationship. Others become devouring mothers, consuming their partner's autonomy. Jung observed that women with mother complexes cannot separate their needs from others' needs. They don't know where they end and you begin. This isn't intimacy, it's psychological fusion. She thinks she loves you, but she's actually trying to complete herself through you. When she has the eternal daughter complex, she unconsciously seeks someone to take care of her the way her mother never did. Your role becomes providing the unconditional love and security she missed in childhood. But here's the trap. No romantic partner can ever fulfill a maternal role completely. You'll notice she becomes helpless in situations where she should be capable. She'll create crises that require your rescue. She'll make herself small and vulnerable to trigger your protective instincts. This isn't conscious manipulation. It's an unconscious reenactment of the mother-child dynamic she never resolved. The devouring mother complex is even more dangerous. Here, she unconsciously sees you as her child to control and possess. She'll suffocate you with care while slowly eroding your independence. She gives not out of love, but out of a compulsion to be needed. Jung realized that both types cannot love as equals because they cannot relate as equals. The eternal daughter sees you as a parent figure. The devouring mother sees you as a child. Neither sees you as a man worthy of adult romantic love. This complex explains why she can seem so loving while being fundamentally unavailable. The love she offers isn't romantic love. It's the desperate attempt of a wounded child to finally get what she missed, or the controlling care of a mother who cannot let go. The mother complex also creates impossible standards. If she's the eternal daughter, no amount of care will ever be enough, because you cannot replace what she lost in childhood. If she's the devouring mother, any assertion of independence feels like abandonment because you're threatening her sense of purpose. Jung saw that these women often choose partners who activate their complex rather than challenge it. They're not attracted to men who could love them as women. They're attracted to men who fit their unconscious template of the parent-child dynamic they're trying to resolve. The tragedy is that healing requires facing the original wound, not recreating it in new relationships. But facing that wound means acknowledging that the love she seeks from you cannot actually heal what's broken inside her. And most women with mother complexes would rather keep searching for the perfect parent than accept they must heal themselves. 4. The mask. She wears so well you never see her. Carl Jung understood that some women live their entire lives behind what he called the persona, a mask so perfect that even they forget who exists underneath. This isn't occasional pretending. This is complete identity replacement. She doesn't love you because there's no authentic self left to do the loving. You fell in love with her performance, the way she laughed at your jokes, how she seemed to understand you perfectly, the way she mirrored your interests and values. You thought you'd found your soulmate, but Jung would tell you something that cuts deep. You never met the real woman. You met her persona, and the persona cannot love. It can only perform love. The persona develops as a survival mechanism. Maybe she learned early that being authentic was dangerous. Maybe her real self was rejected, criticized, or ignored. So she created a false self that gets positive responses. Over time, this mask becomes so sophisticated that she believes it's who she really is. Jung observed that women with overdeveloped personas become chameleons. They study what each man wants and become exactly that. With you, she became the perfect girlfriend. With her ex, she was someone completely different. With her next boyfriend, she'll transform again. She's not being fake. She genuinely becomes these different versions because she has no stable core identity. This is why the relationship felt so intense so quickly. She didn't gradually reveal herself to you. She instantly became what you wanted. Your dream woman appeared overnight because she constructed herself from your desires. But construction isn't creation. Performance isn't authenticity. And mimicry isn't love. The persona explains her uncanny ability to say exactly what you needed to hear. She wasn't reading your mind. She was reading your reactions and adjusting her performance accordingly. Every conversation was a feedback loop where she calibrated her responses to maximize your positive reaction. You thought she understood you deeply, but she was actually studying you like a script. Jung realized that these women become addicted to the validation their persona receives. They need constant confirmation that their performance is working. Your love becomes their drug, but they're not addicted to you. They're addicted to the proof that their mask is convincing. When you stop providing that validation, or when maintaining the persona becomes exhausting, they disappear. The most disturbing aspect is that she genuinely believes her own performance. She's not conscious of the deception because she's deceived herself first. When she tells you she loves you, she means it in the moment. But she's speaking as the persona, not as her authentic self. The real woman underneath might be incapable of love, indifferent to you, or simply absent entirely. This creates a peculiar form of emotional emptiness. You pour your authentic feelings into what you think is a real relationship, but you're actually feeding a psychological construct. It's like trying to love a mirror. It reflects your emotions back to you, but there's nothing substantial behind the surface. Jung saw that persona-driven women often have multiple versions of themselves running simultaneously. She's the devoted girlfriend with you, the wild party girl with her friends, the innocent daughter with her family. None of these versions communicate with each other. They exist in separate compartments, each believing it's the real her. The relationship ends when maintaining your version of her becomes too costly, or when a new man appears who requires a different performance. She doesn't leave because she stops loving you. She leaves because your version of her is no longer useful. The woman who loved you never existed. She was a temporary construction that served its purpose and was then dismantled. This is why closure feels impossible. You're trying to understand the motivations of someone who was never really there. You're seeking explanations from a person who existed only as a reflection of your own desires. Jung would tell you that you cannot mourn the loss of someone who never existed. You can only mourn the illusion of love you created together. 5. The wound that makes her run before you can. Jung discovered that some women carry such deep abandonment terror that they develop an elaborate system to avoid ever being left again. They don't run because they don't love you. They run because they love the control of leaving first more than they could ever love staying vulnerable. This isn't the obvious abandonment fear that makes women clingy and desperate. This is the sophisticated version that masquerades as independence and strength. She learned early that everyone leaves eventually, so she developed a strategy. Get what you need, then leave before they can hurt you. It's not cruelty. It's survival. Jung observed that these women have an almost supernatural ability to sense when a man is beginning to pull away, lose interest, or consider leaving. They've developed hypersensitive radar for the smallest signs of rejection: a delayed text response, a distracted kiss, a moment of hesitation when making future plans. Where other women might fight for the relationship, she starts planning her exit. The abandonment wound creates a peculiar relationship with love itself. She desperately wants it but cannot trust it. Every moment of happiness comes with the shadow of anticipated loss. She cannot be present in loving moments because she's constantly scanning for signs that it's about to end. This hypervigilance makes genuine intimacy impossible. You thought her independence was attractive, the way she didn't need you, didn't cling, didn't demand constant reassurance. But Jung understood that this wasn't healthy independence. It was defensive detachment. She stayed emotionally distant not because she was strong, but because closeness felt like setting herself up for devastation. The wound manifests in subtle tests that you probably never recognized. She would create small conflicts to see if you'd leave. She would withdraw affection to see if you'd fight for her. She would become difficult to see if you'd choose her anyway. But these weren't invitations for you to prove your love. They were reconnaissance missions to gather data about your commitment level. Jung realized that women with abandonment wounds often sabotage relationships at the exact moment they become most meaningful. The deeper the connection grows, the more terrifying the potential loss becomes. So she creates distance, picks fights, or finds reasons why you're incompatible. It's not because she doesn't love you. It's because she loves you enough that losing you would destroy her. This explains the confusing mixed signals. One day she's planning your future together. The next she's listing your incompatibilities. She's not being manipulative. She's genuinely torn between her desire for love and her terror of loss. Every step closer to real intimacy triggers her abandonment defense system. The most painful aspect is that she often leaves just when you're falling deepest in love. Your increasing attachment feels threatening to her wounded psyche. The more you invest, the more catastrophic her potential loss becomes. So she cuts her losses while she still can, leaving you bewildered about what went wrong. Jung saw that these women develop an internal narrative that frames leaving as self-protection rather than abandonment. She's not running away from love. She's running towards safety. She's not hurting you. She's preventing you from hurting her. This narrative allows her to leave while maintaining her identity as someone who values love. The abandonment wound also creates a peculiar form of emotional bookkeeping. She's constantly measuring what she's invested versus what she's received, ready to withdraw her assets the moment the balance feels unfavorable. Love becomes a risk management exercise rather than an act of faith. The cruelest irony is that in trying to avoid abandonment, she guarantees it. By leaving first, she creates the very rejection she fears. But her wounded psyche interprets this as proof that she was right to be cautious, not evidence that her strategy is self-defeating. Each relationship that ends this way reinforces her belief that leaving first is the only way to maintain control. Jung would tell you that you cannot love someone out of their abandonment wound. The wound existed before you and will exist after you. Your love, no matter how genuine, cannot compete with a survival strategy that has kept her emotionally safe for years. She doesn't leave because your love isn't enough. She leaves because no love could ever feel safe enough to risk staying for. 6. The fortress she built around her heart. Carl Jung understood that some women construct psychological fortresses so sophisticated that they can simulate intimacy while remaining completely unreachable. They don't avoid vulnerability because they're cold. They avoid it because being truly seen feels like psychological death. You thought you knew her intimately. She shared stories from her past, talked about her dreams, even cried in front of you. But Jung would reveal the devastating truth. Everything she shared was carefully curated information designed to create the illusion of openness while protecting her core self from exposure. You were allowed into the courtyard, never the castle. The fear of vulnerability develops as a response to early emotional trauma. Maybe she trusted someone completely and was betrayed. Maybe she showed her authentic self and was rejected. Maybe she learned that revealing weakness invites attack. So she developed layers of protection so intricate that even she sometimes forgets where the defenses end and the real person begins. Jung observed that these women become masters of emotional misdirection. They'll share a painful memory from childhood while revealing nothing about their current fears. They'll discuss their deepest insecurities while keeping their true desires hidden. They create intimacy theater, all the props and staging of emotional connection without any actual exposure of the self. This is why conversations with her felt simultaneously deep and frustrating. She would talk for hours about meaningful topics, but you'd walk away feeling like you hadn't learned anything essential about who she really was. She specialized in vulnerable-sounding revelations that actually revealed nothing vulnerable at all. The fortress manifests in her relationship with physical intimacy too. She might be sexually available, even adventurous, but there's an invisible barrier that prevents true erotic connection. Sex becomes another performance space where she can appear open while remaining fundamentally closed. You're making love to her body while her essence watches from behind bulletproof glass. Jung realized that women with vulnerability terror often choose partners who don't threaten their defenses. They're attracted to men who are satisfied with surface-level connection, who don't ask probing questions, who accept the illusion of intimacy without demanding the reality. If you were trying to reach her real self, you probably felt like you were failing at something undefined. The fear creates a peculiar relationship with love itself. She wants to be loved, but only the version of herself that she's constructed for public consumption. The idea of someone loving her authentic self, with all its messiness and imperfection, terrifies her more than being alone. So she ensures that no one ever gets close enough to love the real woman. This explains why she could say, "I love you," while remaining emotionally unavailable. The love she offered was real, but it was the love of someone speaking from behind a mask to someone she kept at a safe distance. It was fortress-to-fortress communication, not heart-to-heart connection. Authentic love requires the courage to be truly seen, and she had systematically eliminated that possibility. The fortress also explains her ability to end relationships without apparent emotional devastation. She didn't lose someone who truly knew her. She lost someone who knew her representative. The real woman remained protected, untouched by the relationship's end. You were grieving a connection that, from her perspective, never fully existed. Jung saw that these women often mistake emotional numbness for strength. They pride themselves on not needing anyone, not depending on others for validation, not falling apart when relationships end. But this isn't emotional maturity. It's emotional paralysis. They've confused invulnerability with independence. The most tragic aspect is that the fortress eventually becomes a prison. What started as protection from emotional harm becomes protection from emotional life itself. She cannot be hurt deeply, but she also cannot love deeply, feel joy deeply, or experience the full spectrum of human connection. The walls that keep pain out also keep life out. The fortress mentality creates a self-fulfilling prophecy. Because she cannot allow herself to be truly vulnerable, she never experiences the deep love that could make vulnerability feel safe. Because she never experiences that love, she has no evidence that vulnerability can lead to anything other than pain. The protection system maintains itself by preventing the very experiences that could heal the original wound. Jung would tell you that trying to storm her fortress will only strengthen her defenses. The harder you push for real intimacy, the higher she builds her walls. You cannot love someone into vulnerability. The decision to lower her defenses must come from within, and it requires her to choose courage over safety, a choice she may never be willing to make. 7. The battle she fights against every woman. Carl Jung uncovered a disturbing truth about feminine psychology. Some women are so consumed by unconscious competition with other women that they cannot experience genuine love for anyone. Every relationship becomes a battlefield where she's fighting invisible enemies, and you become collateral damage in a war you didn't know existed. This isn't the obvious jealousy that makes women check your phone or interrogate you about female co-workers. This is a deeper, more insidious form of competition that operates below conscious awareness. She's not just competing for your attention. She's competing against every woman who has ever existed in your life, including those who existed before she was born. Jung observed that women with competitive complexes view other females as existential threats to their identity. Your mother becomes a rival for your primary loyalty. Your ex-girlfriend becomes a standard she must surpass. Your female friends become potential replacements she must neutralize. Even women you've never met, actresses, models, the barista at your coffee shop, become competitors in a game where losing means annihilation. The competition extends beyond your relationships with other women. She's competing against idealized versions of femininity that exist only in her mind. She must be more beautiful than the perfect woman, more interesting than the fascinating woman, more lovable than the irresistible woman. But these standards are impossible to meet because they're not based on real people. They're based on her deepest insecurities projected outward. This is why she could never truly see you as an individual. You weren't a man with your own preferences, history, and desires. You were a prize to be won in her ongoing competition with womankind. Your love wasn't valuable for its own sake. It was valuable as proof that she had defeated her invisible rivals. She didn't love you. She loved winning you. Jung realized that competitive women often have a distorted relationship with their own femininity. They simultaneously over-identify with being female while harboring deep resentment toward feminine nature itself. They compete with other women because they're really competing with the parts of themselves they cannot accept. Every victory over another woman is a temporary victory over their own self-hatred. The competition creates a peculiar form of paranoia in relationships. She reads threats into innocent interactions, interprets kindness toward other women as betrayal, and sees conspiracies where none exist. A waitress who smiles at you becomes a seductress. A female colleague who calls about work becomes a predator. Your politeness to other women becomes evidence of your disloyalty to her. This explains why she could be possessive while being emotionally distant. Possessiveness wasn't about love. It was about securing her territory against invasion. She needed to control your interactions with other women, not because she treasured your connection, but because losing you to another woman would represent the ultimate defeat in her psychological war. The competitive complex also manifests in her relationship with your past. She cannot accept that other women existed in your life before her because their existence diminishes her victory. She wants to be your first everything, first love, first sexual experience, first heartbreak. When that's impossible, she tries to rewrite history by making you forget or devalue previous relationships. Jung saw that these women often choose partners who activate their competitive instincts rather than soothe them. They're attracted to men who have options, who have had meaningful relationships with other women, who are desired by other females. But this attraction guarantees ongoing torment because his desirability means constant threats to her supremacy. The competition creates exhaustion in relationships. Instead of enjoying love, she's constantly defending against imaginary rivals. Instead of building intimacy, she's strategizing to maintain her advantage. Instead of being present with you, she's fighting battles against women who may not even know she exists. The most destructive aspect is that the competition never ends. Even if she successfully isolates you from all other women, she continues fighting against the women in your past, the women in your imagination, the women who might exist in your future. Victory is impossible because the enemy is infinite. Jung understood that competitive women cannot love authentically because love requires seeing the other person as valuable in themselves, not as a trophy in a contest. They cannot experience gratitude for love received because they interpret it as their due reward for winning. They cannot feel secure in love because security would mean ending the competition, and the competition has become their identity. The tragedy is that she often wins these competitions while losing everything that matters. She successfully drives away other women, controls your social interactions, and secures your exclusive attention. But in winning the battle for your devotion, she destroys the conditions that could have made that devotion meaningful. You end up belonging to someone who cannot appreciate what she has won because she's already scanning for the next threat to defeat. 8. The prison she built that became her identity. Carl Jung discovered that some women become so addicted to their own suffering that they cannot allow healing, growth, or genuine love to enter their lives. They don't reject love because they're incapable of it. They reject it because it threatens the victim identity that has become their source of power, meaning, and connection to the world. You tried to love her out of her pain. You offered solutions to her problems, comfort for her wounds, hope for her future. But Jung would explain why this felt like pushing against an immovable wall. She needs her suffering more than she needs your love. Her pain isn't a problem to be solved. It's a lifestyle to be maintained. The victim identity develops as a survival mechanism in genuinely difficult circumstances. Maybe she experienced real trauma, real abandonment, real betrayal. But somewhere along the way, she discovered that suffering provided benefits that healing could not. Pain gave her attention, sympathy, special treatment, and most importantly, a sense of moral superiority over those who hurt her. Jung observed that victim-identified women develop sophisticated psychological systems to maintain their suffering. They unconsciously sabotage solutions, reject help that would actually work, and create new problems when old ones get resolved. This isn't conscious manipulation. It's unconscious self-preservation. Without her pain, who would she be? This is why your attempts to help felt futile. You thought you were offering rescue from her misery, but she experienced your help as an attack on her identity. Every solution you proposed threatened to take away something essential to her sense of self. She needed you to witness her suffering, not eliminate it. The victim identity creates a peculiar relationship with responsibility. She sees herself as the passive recipient of life's cruelties rather than an active participant in her own experience. This worldview makes her feel powerless, but it also absolves her of the terrifying burden of choice. If she's always the victim, she never has to be accountable for her life's direction. Jung realized that women trapped in victim consciousness cannot love authentically because love requires vulnerability, and vulnerability requires admitting that she has some control over her experience. To love you fully, she would need to acknowledge that she chose you, that she's participating in creating the relationship, that she bears some responsibility for its success or failure. But these acknowledgements would shatter her victim identity. This explains why she could accept your love while never fully reciprocating. Your love became more evidence of her specialness, another person drawn to rescue her from her tragic circumstances. But reciprocating would require stepping out of the victim role and into the role of someone who has something valuable to offer. That transformation felt more threatening than staying unloved. The victim identity also explains her relationship with other people's problems. She's attracted to broken people not because she wants to help them, but because their brokenness validates her own suffering. She surrounds herself with other victims, creating a community bonded by shared pain rather than shared joy. Your attempts to introduce positivity into this ecosystem felt like betrayal of the group's foundational values. Jung saw that victim-identified women often have an investment in proving that love cannot heal, that hope is naive, that happiness is temporary. Your love became a test case for her worldview. If she allowed your love to heal her, she would have to admit that her years of suffering were partially self-imposed. It's easier to reject love than to question the story that has defined her existence. The victim identity creates a peculiar form of pride. She takes strange satisfaction in having endured more than others, in being uniquely damaged, in requiring special understanding that ordinary people cannot provide. This pride masquerades as humility. She's not claiming to be better than others, just more wounded. But the underlying message is the same. She's special, and her specialness is rooted in her suffering. This is why she could seem to love drama more than peace. Drama validates her victim narrative, provides new material for her story of persecution, and gives her opportunities to demonstrate her long-suffering nature. Peace, by contrast, threatens to reveal that she's capable of happiness, which would undermine everything she believes about herself and her circumstances. The most tragic aspect is that she often pushes away the very people who could genuinely help her heal. She's attracted to people who will participate in her victim narrative, those who will hurt her, neglect her, or confirm her beliefs about her powerlessness. People who offer genuine love and support feel dangerous because they threaten to expose the self-imposed nature of her prison. Jung understood that trying to love someone out of victim consciousness is like trying to convince someone to leave a house they've spent years building. Even if the house is uncomfortable, it's familiar. Even if it's limiting, it's safe. Even if it's painful, it's theirs. The victim identity may be a prison, but it's a prison she controls, and control feels more valuable than freedom. 9. The moment she realizes love would mean losing herself. Carl Jung understood that some women have constructed their entire identity around being unloved, independent, or emotionally unavailable. When genuine love appears, it doesn't feel like salvation, it feels like death. They don't reject love because they don't want it. They reject it because accepting it would require becoming someone they don't recognize. You offered her everything she claimed to want: security, devotion, understanding, partnership. But Jung would explain why this felt threatening rather than wonderful. She had built her entire sense of self around not having these things. Her independence wasn't just a preference, it was her identity. Her emotional unavailability wasn't just a defense mechanism, it was who she believed herself to be. The fear of losing herself in love runs deeper than the common worry about losing individual interests or friendships. This is existential terror about the dissolution of the self she has carefully constructed over years or decades. She has spent so much time being the woman who doesn't need anyone that she cannot imagine, being the woman who chooses to be with someone. Jung observed that women with this complex often have a history of defining themselves in opposition to others' expectations. Maybe she grew up watching her mother lose herself in marriage. Maybe she witnessed friends become unrecognizable after falling in love. Maybe she survived difficult relationships by promising herself she would never be that vulnerable again. Her independence became her religion, and your love felt like apostasy. This is why she could seem to want love while simultaneously sabotaging it. Part of her genuinely craved connection, but a deeper part recognized that real love would require dismantling the protective identity she had spent years perfecting. She wasn't choosing between love and independence. She was choosing between love and the version of herself she knew how to be. The identity crisis creates a peculiar form of relationship ambivalence. She's simultaneously drawn to your love and repelled by what accepting it would mean. Every moment of genuine connection is followed by panic about losing herself. Every step toward intimacy triggers an equal and opposite step toward self-preservation. Jung realized that these women often test love by trying to maintain their old identity within it. They want to be loved exactly as they are, without having to grow, change, or adapt. But love is inherently transformative. It requires becoming someone who can receive love, give love, and exist in partnership. The woman who cannot love is not the same woman who can love. They are fundamentally different people. This explains her hot and cold behavior that probably drove you crazy. When she was cold, she was protecting her familiar identity. When she was hot, she was briefly allowing herself to imagine becoming someone new. But the moment that new identity started to feel real, her protective systems would activate, and she would retreat back to the safety of her old self. The identity protection also manifests in her relationship with vulnerability. She's not just afraid of being hurt. She's afraid of becoming the kind of person who can be hurt. Vulnerability requires a fundamental shift in self-concept from invulnerable to human, from self-sufficient to interdependent, from safe to alive. These shifts feel like death to someone whose identity depends on the opposite qualities. Jung saw that women with this complex often have an investment in being unique, special, or different from other women. Being the woman who doesn't need love, doesn't depend on men, doesn't lose herself in relationships becomes a source of pride. Your love threatened not just her independence, but her sense of superiority over women who do need love. The most painful aspect is that she often wants to want love more than she wants love itself. She's attracted to the idea of being the kind of person who can love and be loved, but she cannot bridge the gap between wanting to be that person and actually becoming her. The transformation feels too radical, too dangerous, too much like losing everything she has worked to become. Carl Jung spent decades studying the human psyche, but there was one conclusion he rarely spoke about openly. Some people are so committed to their psychological patterns that they will choose familiar suffering over unfamiliar joy. The woman who couldn't love you wasn't broken. She was protecting a version of herself that felt safer than the version that could love. Jung knew that insight without action is just elegant suffering. The question isn't whether you can understand her now. It's whether you can understand yourself enough to stop choosing people who cannot choose you back.